fun now?
Imagine a world where zombies rule the streets, tearing through everything, eating peoples like a chewing gum. For most people, that would be pure nightmare fuel, but not for this lonely loser. The way he's been living, he's already halfway to being a zombie himself, stuck inside the Matrix, and his crush is already taking clapping session with his boss.
Sir, please not here.
Oh, don't worry.
But one day, he wakes up in zombie apocalypse, and he's free to do whatever he wanted. Then he created a list to do 100 things, like taking clapping session with a hot blonde, becoming the Superman, and meet his parents, before he dies. 3 years back, he landed what he thought was his dream job. At first, it seemed perfect, bright vibes, friendly faces, and to top it off, he even met a hot colleague named Sayori. And he is thinking, Tendo, how to clap her as soon as possible. But for Tendo, it felt like life was finally falling into place. But reality had other plans. Right after the usual welcome party, the cheerful atmosphere vanished. His co-workers suddenly switched into zombie-like work mode, pulling back-to-back all-nighters. He wasn't even allowed to go home for 2 straight days. That was the moment he realized the harsh truth: he is stuck in the Matrix, just like some of you. The next day, he woke up already feeling drained, with zero excitement for work. But since he'd spent years in university preparing for this career, which I called the Matrix guys, he figured he might as well stick with it. The company had some amazing perks too, like vacation days no one was ever allowed to take, endless unpaid overtime, low salaries, and a boss who threw tantrums like a toddler. And the cherry on top, serious health problems that everyone just ignored. By his second year, Tendo's health was falling apart, and his boss still dumped even more work on his desk. The only thing keeping him from losing it completely was Sayori and the hope he might get a shot with her. But life had other plans. Turns out she was already clapped by CEO. And with that, whatever sanity he had left went straight out the window, thinking, I want to escape the Matrix. By this point, Tendo couldn't even figure out why he was still showing up to that nightmare of a job. He'd hit rock bottom so much so that he casually walked into traffic. So he found the truck kun, but truck kun is on the vacation. Switching jobs wasn't an option. Every other place would be just as bad. And if he quit, he'd only dump more work on the poor souls still stuck there. By year 3, the pressure had broken him. Things got so bad, he even considered jumping in front of a train just to avoid another workday. Now, Tendo was basically running on autopilot, a living zombie in his own way. His world had turned into nothing but dull shades of gray, and every thought was about work. The next morning, a wave of panic hit him at the thought of going in. Still, he got dressed, ready to drag himself there. As he stepped outside, he noticed a letter in his mailbox. Turns out, he'd forgotten to pay his parking pass. He headed to the building manager's room to explain, knocking repeatedly with no response. The door was slightly open, so he peeked inside and froze. The manager was literally making love in someone's insides. It was the first splash of color Tendo had seen in ages. He bolted for the exit, but outside was swarming with more zombies. Turning back, he sprinted upstairs, his only thought still being, man, I'm gonna be late for work. Then, a crashing plane tore through the sky, and it hit him. Every boss who made his life miserable was probably gone. He didn't have to work anymore. For the first time in years, the world was full of color again. On a rooftop, he started listing all the things he could finally do with his life. Then he thought about Sayori, wondering if she was safe. Even if it killed him, he'd confess his feelings. After all, she was the CEO's side chick, but she is hot, and with how massive that guy was, there was no way he'd outrun zombies. Jumping on his bike, Tendo sped to her place only to find his boss there, already zombified. Perfect chance. He slammed his resignation into his hands and launched him out the window. But Sayori was there too. And she wasn't human anymore either. Tears in his eyes, he confessed just to close that chapter, then bolted before he became her next meal. That night, Tendo started thinking about what to do with his life now. In a world where he could be gone any second, why not enjoy every moment? That's when he decided to make a bucket list, things he wanted to experience before his time was up. And first thing is to complete many clapping sessions as possible. Tell me in comment guys, what's your bucket list? The next morning, he jolted awake from a nightmare about his old soul-crushing job, but then relief hit him. Those days were over. It was the zombie apocalypse now, and honestly, he was loving it. Feeling more alive than ever, he finally cleaned his entire room for the first time in years, and the sense of freedom was unreal. He grabbed a cold beer from the fridge, savoring every sip like it was the best drink of his life. On TV, the news showed the city falling apart, fires everywhere, chaos in the streets, even the newsroom itself close to being overrun. Yet, the anchor kept reporting till the very end, right before the broadcast went dead. Sure, the world was falling to pieces, but Tendo didn't care. All that mattered right now was kicking back, drinking beer, and making up for all the miserable years he'd wasted. But when he went back for another can, reality struck. He was out. That was, without question, the most tragic thing to happen all day. He had planned to be lazy, but beer was non-negotiable. So, no matter how dangerous the trip would be, he was going out. After all, what kind of chill day would it be without a drink in his hand? While Tendo was busy debating his life choices. In another room, a couple was losing their minds over the whole zombie situation. Pretty normal, all things considered. The guy tried to comfort her, saying if they could just hold out one more day, help might arrive. But deep down, no one was coming. Stepping onto the balcony, he prayed for anyone to save them, only to lock eyes with Tendo, who was casually sliding down a drain pipe. Shocked, the man told him to get inside while it was still safe, but Tendo waved it off, saying he just needed to grab a few things. He introduced himself as their next-door neighbor, and the man, still baffled by Tendo's chill attitude mid-apocalypse, said his name was Kosaka. Since Tendo was already heading to the store, he offered to pick up some essentials for them like noodles and toilet paper. Soon, he was speeding down the street on his bike, zombies quickly taking notice. If they trapped him, he was done for. But there was no way he was going without beer, so this trip was worth the risk. Outside the convenience store sat a bike with a camera on it, but Tendo didn't even notice his mind was locked on beer because he is useless just like you. He burst inside, pushing the door open, and started singing his goofy beer song while shopping. Mid-verse, he spotted a girl near the fridge and instantly died inside from embarrassment. Like 40-year-old V-card holder, trying to play it off, he acted normal, but she stayed silent. To break the tension, he kept talking, but she brushed past him. When he tried to ask for her contact, she finally spoke, mocking him for risking his life just for beer, without even grabbing water for the hangover. In her eyes, someone with survival instincts that bad was just a liability. To make it worse, he'd left the store door half open, letting zombies in. Tendo tried to shield her, but she pulled him back just as a truck crashed through the wall, wiping out the undead purely by luck. Lesson learned: think before acting and always shut the door. He hoped he'd run into her again, but now wasn't the time. His bike was totaled by the truck, leaving him surrounded. Spotting a scooter nearby, he hopped on and sped off an upgrade, but it got him thinking. With the apocalypse starting during rush hour, there had to be even better rides lying around. Sure enough, he soon spotted a hot rod and claimed it as his own. When he finally made it back, he stopped by Kosaka's apartment only to find the place covered in blood. Looked like they wouldn't be joining him anytime soon. Tendo kept reminding himself that any moment could be his last, but if that was true, he wanted to squeeze everything out of life and finally do all the things he missed while stuck at work. After thinking it over, he wrote down every single goal he wanted to hit. The next day, we cut to the hot girl in her high-rise penthouse. She kicked off her morning with a 10 km treadmill run, taking a strict, methodical approach to surviving the zombie outbreak. She was studying the undead's movement patterns, but needed to get closer to gather accurate data and grab supplies. That's why she'd been at the convenience store when she crossed paths with Tendo. She had already been analyzing him, and even the truck that smashed through the shop was something she'd predicted. Later, reviewing her footage of him, she wondered if maybe his free-spirited style wasn't so bad. Elsewhere, another group of survivors was holed up together. A little girl sobbed over losing her father, while the club manager tried to comfort her, telling her she'd done amazingly just hanging on this long. But the moment was cut short when one of his men rushed in to warn that zombies were back. The manager promised the girl he'd return, then headed out with his crew to face the swarm head-on, fighting hard to protect the people left inside. Meanwhile, Tendo was out enjoying life on his new motorcycle, heading into Shinjuku to track down his best friend, Kencho. Earlier that day, he'd been trying to grow a cool beard, but when it didn't come in fast enough, he grabbed a marker to fake one. It looked ridiculous, so he shaved it off. While figuring out what to do next, he noticed his phone suddenly buzzing with messages. That meant the internet was working again. Excited, he fired off texts to all his old friends, people he hadn't spoken to since starting work 3 years ago. But then, it hit him. The only reason the network was up was because traffic was so low, which likely meant most of them were already gone. The thought crushed him. All those nights of skipping out on hanging with friends, just to grind through overtime, what a complete waste. Scrolling through his contacts, he spotted Kencho's name. Tendo knew this guy was a fighter. There was no way he'd just roll over and die. Meanwhile, Kencho was literally ready to give up and let it all end. He'd been trapped in the same room for 3 days with nothing but water, and the hallway outside was so packed with zombies, there was zero chance of escape. To make things worse, he was stuck in there with a zombie girl, and the only reason she hadn't eaten him yet was because of his unusual love for bondage. I bet you if this wouldn't happen. He clapped her rough. Sitting there, Kencho accepted his fate. His life even started flashing before his eyes, and among the memories, he saw moments from his college days with Tendo. Then, out of nowhere, his phone rang. It was Tendo. Shocked to get a call at all, Kensho answered. When Tendo asked where he was, Kensho told him Shinjuku, warning there was no way he could make it through the zombie-filled streets alive. But that didn't stop Tendo. As Tendo headed for Shinjuku, he thought back to their old nights out drinking. Back then, Kensho was doing well, thriving as a real estate contractor, earning great pay, getting praise from his bosses, and even having a love life. He had once told Tendo to quit his soul-crushing job, but Tendo was too deep in the grind to realize he was right. Instead, he'd gotten annoyed and cut the night short. He'd never apologized for that moment, but now, he was determined to make things right. Back with the club manager from earlier, he was on his last legs. As the zombies closed in, he braced himself for the end, but then, the distant blare of a car horn pulled the horde's attention away, giving him an unexpected chance to breathe. The sound also distracted, the undead blocking Kensho's room, clearing the way. Finally free, Kensho stepped out just as Tendo came charging in, yelling at the top of his lungs to apologize, shouting about how he regretted ignoring Kensho's advice and getting jealous of him. Unfortunately, all that noise caught the zombies' attention again, forcing them to bolt for the rooftop. They made it up there, but the undead were right behind them. Kensho thought this was his final moment all over again, but Tendo refused to accept it. His plan, jump across the rooftops. Kensho hesitated, convinced he couldn't do it. Tendo leapt first, landing safely. Now it was Kensho's turn. Before jumping, he apologized for making Tendo feel jealous back then, admitting that his perfect job was actually miserable. He'd been forcing people into terrible contracts and only bragged to make himself feel better. What he really wanted was to be a stand-up comedian. Tendo told him it wasn't too late to start. Fired up, Kensho took off running, and for some reason, stripped mid-jump. He didn't make the full distance and ended up dangling from the ledge, but Tendo grabbed him just in time. Sadly, in the process, Kensho managed to crack his nuts. That night, the two of them partied on the rooftop, drinking completely naked because apparently, that's just what the homies do now. Tendo was playing a zombie video game, but after dying in-game, he rolled back into the hammock he was lounging in. Meanwhile, Kensho had been cooking, and the food he served up was hands down the best thing Tendo had ever tasted. Still impressed, Tendo joked that Kensho was probably good at everything, which explained why women seemed to flock to him. Kensho shrugged it off, saying this level of cooking was basic and maybe Tendo's lack of skill in the kitchen was why his love life was so dead. Fired up, Tendo swore he'd land a date today, though his options in a zombie apocalypse weren't exactly promising. Later, Kensho looked over Tendo's bucket list and couldn't help but laugh. Some goals were ridiculous, like meeting and whining and dining a flight attendant during the end of the world. That would take some cosmic level luck to pull off, but Tendo didn't care. Unrealistic or not, he was going to do what he wanted. Kensho was fine with that, but pointed out the list didn't even hit 100 items yet. So, he added his own dream, becoming a stand-up comedian, and by default, Tendo had to join him in that goal. Since Tendo had saved his life, Kensho was on board for anything he could dream up. First on the agenda, a massive flat-screen TV. So, they jumped in the hot rod and set off for the mall. But before they could get there, they slammed into a fiery roadblock complete with a zombie firefighter. And to make matters worse, a massive zombie truck conversion charging straight at them, sending Kensho screaming, "Like my girlfriend last night." Tendo flashed back to his wild beer run and suddenly came up with a ridiculous plan: jump the tanker. Sure, it was insane, but Kensho wasn't offering anything better. Against all odds, they pulled it off, but the tanker exploded behind them in a massive fireball, forcing them to duck into an underground mall for cover. The problem? The place was crawling with zombies, so escape was out of the question. They ditched the bike and bolted for a nearby shop with its door slightly open. The undead followed, but they slipped inside just in time, slamming the door shut on a few zombie fingers. A flashlight flicked on, revealing 3 baddies and an old man huddled in the corner. At first, the strangers were cautious, unsure if Tendo and Kensho were infected. Once they proved they weren't, Kensho was genuinely relieved to see other survivors, though one of the women pointed out that being trapped in here with zombies on all sides wasn't exactly lucky. Still, at least it was a convenience store, meaning they wouldn't starve. If they were going to survive this, they weren't doing it sober. Everyone started gathering food and booze, then sat down to share. One of the women asked for introductions, so Kensho introduced himself and Tendo. The guy in the corner was still panicking, so Kensho asked the women how they knew each other. They introduced themselves as Raika, Maki, and Yukari, flight attendants whose plane had just landed in Japan when the outbreak hit. That's when it clicked for Tendo. This was his chance to whine and clap a flight attendant, just like on his bucket list. The only issue, they were clearly upset, and he quickly realized he had zero game, and, just like you guys, he awkwardly approached Yukari, but it was obvious he didn't know what he was doing. Looking to Kensho for backup, Tendo was horrified to see his friend already charming Maki with ease. Kensho even threw him a smug smile, mid-flirt, just to rub it in. Desperate, Tendo decided to be funny and snorted an entire bottle of alcohol, which, surprisingly, got everyone in a party mood. Later, he was puking his guts out when Yukari came over to check on him, giving him a spark of hope. Meanwhile, Rika kept drinking and started ranting at the guy in the corner only to reveal the real shocker. The dude had been bitten, and never told anyone. As Rika kept rambling, the guy she'd been yelling at suddenly moved toward her. For a split second, she thought he was trying to get frisky, but no, he actually wanted to eat her, and not in the way she imagined. Her screams echoed through the store, waking Kensho and Maki. I think guys, Kensho is a top G. Maki, still dazed after her fun, barely reacted to the noise, and say I want that ice cream again. Meanwhile, Tendo was still in the bathroom with Yukari. She gently let him down, explaining she already had a boyfriend. Kensho and Maki eventually went to check on Rika, only to find she'd already turned. The zombie lunged at Maki, tearing into her face. She then went for Kensho, but he smashed her aside with a suitcase. But the old man who'd been bitten, nowhere to be seen. Tendo and Yukari were chatting about their jobs, with Yukari sharing how an old man once made her question every decision that led her to becoming a flight attendant. Just as they started genuinely bonding, that same old man stumbled down the stairs and bit her. Before Tendo could think, he knocked the man down the steps. He didn't want to abandon Yukari, but she was going to turn and the old man was still moving. With tears in his eyes, he ran, meeting Kensho, who had a surprise. Somehow, he'd managed to grab the flat-screen TV they came for. They escaped on the motorcycle, the mall shrinking behind them in the distance. Tendo, shaken by the night's events, promised himself he'd never forget what his dream was, and he added it to his growing bucket list. Back in his younger days, Tendo was basically a mini Superman taking on older students like it was just part of his morning routine, all to protect a sweet little dog. To the people around him, he was kind of a hero back then, but that was just a dream, and he eventually woke up. Later, Kensho was watching the news and confirmed what they already knew: Japan was completely overrun. Still, the military had managed to secure a few remote villages in the mountains. Hearing that, Tendo felt a wave of relief. His family lived in one of the most isolated spots in the country, so they were probably safe. While helping Kensho dye his hair for his fresh start, Tendo made a bold declaration: he was going to become Superman for real. His new goal was to save people from zombies wherever he could. Kensho wasn't convinced, pointing out that Tendo didn't even own a gun. But Tendo already had a plan to fix that, and he added a new goal to his bucket list: become a superhero. The two set off for the aquarium, part of Tendo's grand plan. The place was in rough shape, completely abandoned by staff, but they explored for a while until Tendo finally found exactly what he'd been looking for. Meanwhile, a bus packed with passengers was stuck in a massive zombie traffic jam. The driver tried to reassure everyone, saying they'd just wait it out and that the sealed bus would keep them safe. Yeah, right. Seconds later, thanks to his bad call, zombies broke in, forcing everyone to run for their lives. Amid the chaos, one girl managed to escape, sprinting toward the aquarium. She thought she was safe until horror movie logic struck and she tripped. Worse, IShowSpeed's zombie mode was in the horde and sprinting straight at her. Just before she became Zombie Chow, Tendo burst out of the aquarium and tackled the sprinter, launching him 10 meters away. His secret weapon, a full shark suit from the aquarium. If a shark's teeth couldn't pierce it, neither could a zombie's. With that, he could finally check off, become a superhero from his bucket list. Spotting more survivors, he directed them into the aquarium for safety. Among them, he noticed his second crush, but there was no time to think about that. IShowSpeed was back for round 2. The suit kept the bites out, but the hits still hurt like hell. Soon, the entire zombie Olympic team had piled on top of him. Kensho's reaction: "You're on your own, man." Eventually, Tendo managed to fling the zombies over the bridge and into the river. Thankfully, his triathlon training paid off. Back inside, Kensho greeted him like he hadn't just abandoned him. Tendo went to talk to his crush, but instead of a warm reunion, she roasted his entire existence. Kensho tried to defend him, but the burns were too severe. Before they could recover, a loud crash echoed through the aquarium. Following the noise, they stumbled upon something horrifying. The zombies couldn't catch any swimmers, so they brought in the big guns: a shark. Only this wasn't your normal shark, this one had legs. As it started chasing them, Tendo and the others ran to warn everyone else in the aquarium. Tendo tried to stay behind and fight, but quickly realized, yeah, you don't mess with a shark that can walk. They got cornered in a room already packed with zombies and headed for the emergency exit. But one terrified girl panicked, grabbed Tendo's crush, hesitated for a second, and then shoved her aside to save herself. Now Tendo's crush was cut off and likely done for. Kensho tried to help, but the door was warped and wouldn't open. When he turned to ask Tendo what to do, Tendo was already gone, charging in to save her. On the other side, his crush was staring down the massive shark, regretting ever sticking with a large group during a zombie chase. She'd accepted her fate until Tendo suddenly dropped from an air vent, tackling the shark away. She was stunned. He'd risk himself for her after the way she roasted him earlier. When she asked why, he didn't need a reason, he just wanted to help. Impressed by his stubbornness, she quickly asked if he had a plan. He didn't, but she did. Sharks are extremely sensitive to electric charges, so shocking it could disorient it. While they worked on the plan, Tendo got smacked through a wall and went down hard. Kensho had to act fast before his friend became shark food, so he came up with a brilliant idea: bait the shark with his bare ass. It worked, though he instantly regretted it. Still, the distraction gave Tendo time to recover. The girl found some batteries and tossed them to Tendo, who shocked the shark into submission. After escaping, they walked out together. Kensho asked if she'd follow the rest of the group, but she said she was done with groups for now. She still didn't get why Tendo would risk himself for her, but he told her she was precious to him now, so of course, he'd save her. Flustered, she finally agreed to give him her Instagram. Later, Tendo was in a store, staring at a Rolex on display. Before the world ended, he could never dream of affording one. But now, he could stack as much ice on his wrist as he wanted. Kensho even showed him an even pricier piece, and soon the two of them were dripped out like they owned the place. That night, they realized they were out of water, and the whole city had gone pitch black. Their phones still had battery, but with no news stations running, it felt like they might be the last people left in town. For a moment, they thought maybe it was time to take this apocalypse seriously. But first, they enjoyed the stunning skyline, now glowing with starlight thanks to the power outage. The next morning, they packed for their next destination, Tendo's hometown, Gunma. Normally, it'd be a 5-hour drive, but with the current state of things, there was no telling what traffic would be like. Kensho asked if they'd finally get a gun for protection, but Tendo had a different plan. If they were traveling, they were going to do it in style by getting a luxury camper. By some twist of fate, they ran into Shizuka at the dealership. Tendo tried inviting her to join them, but his Zero game got him shut down instantly. Kensho, however, struck up a conversation and found out she didn't have a driver's license. With that, they convinced her it'd be safer to travel together. Inside, they were blown away by the selection. There was even a tank-like RV just because it looked cool. Shizuka stuck to her practical side, picking something with good fuel economy, while Tendo fell in love with a decked-out luxury camper. She argued it was too impractical until she spotted an RV design she couldn't resist. The guys teased her for ditching her practical mindset so quickly, but she insisted this was different. Unfortunately, their banter was loud enough to draw a horde. With zombies closing in, they had no choice but to jump into a random RV and hit the road. As they left the city, Kensho rode alongside on his bike, while Tendo drove the RV. Something about the road bothered Tendo. It was completely empty. Even though it was the weekend, Shizuka guessed it was because nobody had enough time to escape when the outbreak hit. Tendo asked if she knew anything about the zombies. She figured it was probably some kind of virus, and if a vaccine was ever made, maybe the world could recover. But for now, survival was the only thing that mattered. That evening, they were about to set up camp when they came across spike strips scattered across the road. And in a zombie apocalypse, there's only one thing worse than zombies: other people. Even worse, the leader of this gang was none other than Tendo's old fatso HR. All the abuse Tendo had suffered under him came flooding back. The boss's plan was clear: trap them so they couldn't drive off and then force Tendo back into working for him. Shizuka wasn't buying his fake act of helping and protecting people from looters because he was the looter, grinning the whole time. But with no way out, Tendo was forced back into his personal hell. While Shizuka tended to Kensho's injuries, he apologized for dragging them into this. She told him not to blame himself. It was obvious this gang had planned it from the start, and there was no way they could have avoided it. Tendo noticed how everyone in the camp was being worked to exhaustion, but he couldn't say a word without risking trouble. While hauling equipment, he stumbled upon a stash of beer. His eyes lit up, and he decided to chill a few so everyone could enjoy them. But before the plan could work, his old boss showed up, furious that Tendo would waste precious electricity on something like making the workers happy. The scolding hit Tendo's PTSD like a hammer, and when the other workers came over and spotted the beer, the boss forced him to hand it out, making it look like it was Tendo's fault for wasting resources. It was clear this man was still the same power-hungry leech, only now he controlled everything. No one could challenge him. He'd even started using zombies as labor, telling Tendo to act more like them, mindless, obedient, and incapable of thinking for himself. This is what happens when there's no union to fight back. That night, Kensho asked Shizuka if she'd noticed Tendo acting differently. She already had. From his behavior, she'd pieced together what his old work life must have been like. She understood because she'd been controlled and exploited before too. She thought back to when she was just a little girl, walking home from school in the rain. She'd found a sickly puppy shivering in a box and decided to take it home. But when she asked her father if she could keep it, he told her to eat it. To him, caring for something weak was pointless. He told her to rise above others and never waste time on childish attachments, basically teaching her to be ruthless, even if it meant throwing away anyone who couldn't keep up. Back in the present, Tendo's scumbag boss was all smiles, putting on a fake friendly act as he welcomed his new workers. Everyone else seemed to be eating, drinking, and laughing while Tendo was stuck running around, working non-stop. Two guys nearby were having a ridiculous conversation about whether hooking up with a zombie woman would get them infected. When one of them ran out of beer, they yelled for Tendo to bring more. Completely worn out, he stumbled, tripped over his own feet, and dropped the drinks. Even in the apocalypse, some things never change. People still treated the servers like trash. Tendo kept apologizing as they barked at him to hurry up. Meanwhile, his old boss was throwing a tantrum because an elderly woman had poured his drink. He demanded that only women with the plot curves serve him. His eyes landed on Shizuka, and he ordered her over. Reluctantly, she poured his drink while he shamelessly stared at her chest. After handing him the glass, he pressured her into having one with him, even though she clearly didn't want to. And the way he licked his lips made it obvious he was thinking about something way worse than just sharing a drink. After finishing her drink, the boss leaned in and told Shizuka to let him grope her. She completely ignored him, so he shouted for Tendo to bring him another bottle, his plan being to get her drunk enough that she might see him as less ugly. Sadly for him, no amount of alcohol could fix that face. When Tendo didn't react instantly, the boss barked even louder, snapping him out of his daze. Overheated, running on no sleep, and constantly yelled at. Tendo grabbed a bottle without realizing it was empty and handed it over. That was all it took for the boss to lose it, spitting out a furious rant that could have filled a small bucket. While his voice echoed through the room, Shizuka sat quietly, lost in thought. She remembered how her father had started molding her from birth to become a CEO, teaching her to use people and stripping away anything resembling a heart. She'd tried to keep hers alive, hiding it away, and symbolically nursing it in the form of a sick puppy she'd found. She read books on animal care, worked tirelessly, and was overjoyed when the dog finally recovered. For a brief moment, she had a real friend, and with that came the dangerous thing her father feared: empathy. So, in his twisted logic, he killed the dog to make sure she never felt that again. From then on, her heart shut down. She followed every order without question, because it was his house and his rules. Over time, she was conditioned to let someone else make all her choices. And now, she saw the same thing happening to Tendo, his old boss chipping away at whatever confidence he had left until there'd be nothing inside him at all. When Tendo accidentally dropped a stack of canned food, Gonzu pounced on the mistake, calling him stupid and useless, and demanding he work extra hours to make up for it. Tendo tried to speak up, but Gonzu immediately tore into him again, breaking down whatever fight Tendo had left. Once he saw Tendo's spirit crushed, Gonzu moved to the last step of his manipulation: gaslighting. Switching to a fake, fatherly tone, he claimed he was only being hard on Tendo for his own good. Then he laid out his choice: stay in the compound, where it was safe under Gonzu's control, or go out into the dangerous world alone, never knowing when the next zombie attack would come. Personally, anyone with sense would take their chances with the apocalypse before working for this human dumpster fire. But Tendo, worn down and drained by Gonzu's voice, couldn't think clearly anymore, and he took the bait. By nightfall, Tendo was still outside, moving like an actual zombie as he worked. Meanwhile, Shizuka was resting in the camper when she spotted Tendo's bucket list. Reading through his dreams brought a small smile to her face, enough for her to grab a pen and add one more goal of her own. The next day, a few guys were out on a supply run. During a break, one complained that Gonzu called himself the leader but never actually lifted a finger. The other shrugged, saying at least they didn't get treated like Tendo. He told his shorter buddy to shut the truck door before a zombie climbed in, but too late, one was already inside. Back at the compound, Shizuka and Kensho were packed and ready to leave, just as they'd planned. But then, Tendo walked out and dropped a bomb. He was staying to work for Gonzu. Kensho thought it had to be a joke, but Tendo was serious. He'd been brainwashed into thinking he was a useless idiot who wouldn't survive a minute outside. Shizuka turned to leave without him, but as Tendo rambled about repaying Gonzu's kindness and obeying his every order, she stopped. His words reminded her of herself when she was under her father's control. She turned back to give Tendo the reality check he desperately needed. She told him Gonzu didn't care about him, he just wanted to strip away his willpower and turn him into a mindless drone. Then she tore into Gonzu with a roast so brutal it could have ended him on the spot, calling him a bitter, selfish parasite with a face even his mother wouldn't love. Someone who dragged others down just to feel better about himself. Everyone stared in shock at how badly she was verbally destroying him. She admitted she couldn't say for sure whether leaving or staying was the right choice in this world, but she knew she wanted nothing to do with Gonzu or his stench. She handed Tendo back his bucket list and pointed to the goal she'd added. Seeing that she was getting through to him, Gonzu tried to snatch the notebook and tossed it to the ground. That was the breaking point. This anime was literally named after that book, and Tendo wasn't about to let anyone disrespect it. He darted forward, blocking Gonzu's foot before it could crush the notebook, and stood up with a new fire in his eyes. Instead of exploding in rage, he kept it simple. What the hell was I thinking? Gonzu, thanks, but this ain't it. I never want to see your ugly face again. Gonzu was stunned by the sudden confidence. He tried one last time to guilt trip him, saying Tendo still owed him, but Tendo shut him down with, I missed the part where that's my problem. Even if I become a zombie, it's still better than working like one for you. Right then, the supply team rolled back in, bragging about their haul. But before they could celebrate, one of them was torn apart by a zombie that had snuck in. Hitting the road once again, Tendo grinned. He'd now crossed more than 30 items off his bucket list. At the rate Tendo was going, he might hit all 100 bucket list goals before the month was over. But Shizuka couldn't help worrying. Rushing through them like this could easily get him killed. As they drove on, they spotted a truck surrounded by a pile of zombies. That could only mean one thing: someone inside was attracting the horde. Their first road survivor. Excited to play hero again, Tendo quickly threw on his shark suit and struck a dramatic pose, ready for another superhero arc. But before he could make a move, the truck's door flew open and someone else stole the spotlight. A full-on, historically accurate samurai. This warrior leapt nearly 20 feet into the air and took down the zombies in a flurry, even landing a triple kill with nothing but a regular bow. Tendo could only stare in awe. When the samurai removed their mask, the surprise doubled. It was a Russian blonde named Beatrix. She thanked them for their help, and just like that, Shizuka lost her spot as best girl in Tendo's eyes, and now he has fallen in love with her. Beatrix explained she'd come to Japan out of pure love for the culture, everything from legendary battles to, tentacle hentai. Hence the samurai armor. Tendo checked the back of the truck and found it was actually a refrigerated hauler stuffed with tuna. Beatrix then made her request. She needed a working vehicle to deliver the fish to Takasaka, claiming it was an important mission. Shizuka, sensing she might be delivering food to survivors, was willing to consider it. Tendo crouched in front of Beatrix and asked why she cared so much about this delivery. She admitted her fascination with Japan started the same way many kids discover it, through anime, and ever since then, she'd worked hard, saved up, and finally made it here to experience it all for herself. But just as Beatrix had landed in Japan, ready to live out her dream, the world hit her with a massive shut-up. The zombie apocalypse began. Still, she refused to let her goal die. She managed to find the last skilled sushi chef, who didn't work out of a gas station, and he agreed to make her sushi if she could bring him fresh fish. That's all Tendo needed to hear: sushi. He was instantly on board. The rest of the group figured, why not? So they set out for the city to meet the chef. Beatrix led the way, though she admitted she hadn't spoken to him in over 3 days, meaning there was no guarantee he was still alive. Still, her faith in the sushi kept her moving. When they reached a turn, the street ahead was packed with zombies. That wasn't going to stop them. Beatrix and Tendo suited up, full of determination. But did they have an actual plan? Not at all. Luckily, Shizuka had one, and it involved the most tempting bait in zombie history: Kencho's butt. The zombies took the bait, forcing Kencho to sprint like his life depended on it, while Beatrix and Tendo circled around. Once the horde was in position, Tendo blocked them in with a truck, giving Beatrix room to slice through them one by one. Unfortunately, the noise drew even more zombies. Time for phase 2. They started chucking bottles of alcohol at the undead, planning to set them ablaze. But the matches didn't work, and the barricade was breaking. Worse, the zombies were closing in on their RV. If it got surrounded, they'd lose both their ride and the precious fish. Tendo refused to let that happen. He'd rather turn into a zombie than never eat sushi again. He jumped down to defend the truck alongside Beatrix, cutting through zombies at superhuman speed. But there were too many. That's when Shizuka's backup plan came into play. She used a drone to lure the zombies into the main square, which she'd already soaked in fuel. Kencho tossed in a Molotov, and the place erupted into fiery zombie fireworks. From a rooftop, they watched the blaze until the last zombie fell. With the coast clear, nothing stood between them and their long-awaited meal. The sushi chef, originally from Gunma, had spent the last 30 years perfecting his craft. He was overjoyed to know there were still people who appreciated it. As the others dug in, Beatrix hesitated, staring at her first bite of sushi in years. Beatrix finally picked up a piece of sushi, dipped it into soy sauce, and took her first bite. The moment the flavor hit her, tears welled up in her eyes. Seeing that, the sushi chef also started tearing up. For him, this was everything: weeks of non-stop work, missing his daughter's wedding, even skipping his wife's funeral, all worth it for this one moment. Yes, he actually said that. And maybe in that instant, he realized just how bleak his work obsession had been, because his next words were, "Since there aren't any more living customers coming in anytime soon, let's drink every drop of alcohol in this place." That night turned into a sake-fueled celebration. By the next morning, the group was back on the road, but the trip was miserable thanks to a brutal heat wave. Inside the RV, Beatrix complained about the heat, while, in Tendo's eyes, continuing to prove she deserved the best girl title over Shizuka. They hadn't had a proper shower in days, and the smell was starting to get to everyone, which could only mean one thing: time for go to the beach. Everyone changed into bathrobes, and once again Beatrix had Shizuka beat in terms of presence. Her sheer excitement for Japanese culture radiated off her. She started sharing her extensive knowledge about hot springs, but most of it went over everyone's head. The only part they caught was that, during the Edo period, they were advertised as a cure for every illness except lovesickness and down bad syndrome, meaning they wouldn't be much help for Tendo, who was currently hopeless over Shizuka. He tried steering their conversation into flirty territory, but Shizuka stood firm on her stance that love wasn't necessary, while subtly implying Tendo didn't exactly have the funds for romance. Moving on, the guys headed for the men's bath, excited to finally relax. Shizuka went toward the women's section, but Beatrix came back saying there was no hot water on that side, the pump was broken. Hearing this, the guys slipped into philosopher mode, pretending to be reluctant as they suggested there was no other choice but for her to join them. Shizuka shut them down instantly, but Beatrix seemed oddly convinced by the speech and started to agree, making Tendo's down bad condition even worse. Before anything could happen, Tendo and Kensho glanced behind them and saw the bath full of naked zombie men. The group bolted, fleeing into the mountains. Thankfully, there were no mountain climbing zombies, so they were safe, but what good was safety if they didn't even get to enjoy the hot springs? They cried over their misfortune before eventually falling asleep. Later that night, Tendo woke up thirsty and wandered into the forest, looking for water only to stumble upon something far better: a natural hot spring tucked into the mountains. Without hesitation, he stripped down and slid into the water. As he drifted in bliss, he bumped into someone, and realized he was sharing the spring with a completely naked Shizuka. It wasn't going to quench his thirst, but he wasn't complaining. He quickly apologized, but Shizuka told him it was fine, though he should probably leave. Instead, Tendo refused, saying he'd been wanting to do this all day, and he'd rather die than pass up the chance. They sat there in awkward silence until Shizuka started apologizing for shutting down his ideas about relationships. She explained that growing up, she was taught there were only two kinds of people: those who were correct, and those with enough resources to make themselves correct. Her father's philosophy was to hold your ground and sue the other side into the ground until they gave up. Without thinking, she'd fallen into those same habits and hadn't been open with him. Tendo pointed out that she was being completely open right now. She paused, realizing he was right, and admitted she wanted to find a partner she could talk to like this. Then it hit her she'd basically just given Tendo the green light. Flustered, she froze when he asked if she meant what he thought she meant. Before she could answer, Kensho and Beatrix showed up, offended that the two of them had found this hot spring and didn't invite them. Kensho and Beatrix didn't waste a second. They take off their clothes and jumped into the hot spring with Tendo and Shizuka. Tell me in the comments, guys, what is called Tento. After their soak, the group got back on the road toward Gunma. Beatrix worried about Tendo's parents, but he was confident they'd survive. Arthritis might take them down someday, but zombies, not a chance. If they were still alive, Kensho figured he'd need to introduce himself, and naturally, his first thought was to do it naked. Tendo floored the gas just to drown him out. Shizuka asked if he was nervous since it had been 3 years since his last visit. He wasn't exactly nervous, but he admitted things with his father had ended awkwardly. Before he could dwell on it, Beatrix shouted a warning there was a roadblock ahead. Tendo stopped the RV and went to investigate, only to find a tunnel crawling with hundreds of zombies. His village was on the other side, so the sight was alarming, but none of the undead looked familiar, which reassured him. With the tunnel blocked, their only option was to abandon the RV and hike through the forest to get around the mountain, even though he didn't think the zombies had overrun his village. doubts began to creep in until Shizuka pointed out that the far end of the tunnel was also sealed. That meant the villagers had likely trapped the horde inside to protect themselves. Before they could continue, they heard a scream behind them and saw a man sprinting toward them, followed by a zombified boar charging full speed. Beatrix acted fast, loosing an arrow straight between its crazed eyes. The man introduced himself as Kumano and thanked them for saving him. When Tendo asked why he was out there, Kumano explained he'd fled the city after it was completely overrun. The group agreed it was smart, but living in the forest seemed risky until Kumano revealed he was a master carpenter. If he needed a home, he could just build one from scratch. That was all Tendo needed to hear. Building a treehouse was on his bucket list. Without hesitation, he offered to help Kumano finish his, completely ignoring the fact he was supposed to be checking on his parents. Kumano gladly accepted and began giving them lessons. The kind of treehouse you could build depended on the tree itself, so you had to listen to the forest, making sure your chosen tree stayed healthy. If the tree died, so would your home. Tendo admitted he'd always dreamed of building one, which reminded Kumano of his own son. But when Tendo asked about him, Kumano fell silent. His son had been bitten by his wife after she turned into a zombie, and Kumano had been forced to put them both down with his own hands. He never got to share one last moment with him before it happened, but Kencho reassured him that he was there to support him. They kept working on the treehouse until it was finally finished, and it looked great, though I'm not touching that slide after seeing Kencho go down it. Once the treehouse was done, Tendo and the others continued toward Gumma village. Along the way, Tendo pointed out what his parents had meant when they described how they went to school. It was dangerous enough to kill someone, but it also guaranteed no zombies could make it across the death trap. From there, they could finally see the village and walk deeper into the forest to reach it. As they moved forward, Tendo thought about how he had never returned to the village despite having many chances over the years, and now he was determined to make up for it. But when they arrived, the place was completely deserted. Tendo panicked, fearing the zombies had wiped everyone out. He ran around searching until he found everyone inside a hut doing whatever that was. He saw his mom and dad there too and immediately began apologizing for failing them and not visiting in the 3 years he'd been gone. His dad didn't want to hear it, smacked him on the head, and told the group they could stay in some empty rooms. Without another word, he went straight to the fields. Tendo's mom then prepared a meal using wild plants from the area, and Shizuka was impressed by how self-sufficient they were. The village was small and isolated, so during winter they were basically cut off from the world and had to grow most of their own food. People from the city had come to Gumma thinking it was safe, but as usual, someone hid that they'd been bitten and ruined it for everyone, forcing the tunnel to be sealed. Those who made it in uninfected were given spare houses to live in. Still, Tendo's main goal hadn't changed. He was here to help his parents and make up for all the time he'd lost. Tendo starts by helping his mom wash the dishes and doing little chores for her, but she just smiles and tells him it's fine, insisting she can handle it herself. Since he couldn't really help her, he figured he could at least lend a hand to his dad out on the farm. They work side by side in silence, but the quiet feels awkward to Tendo, so he tries starting some small talk. Unfortunately, his dad isn't exactly the chatty type, and only replies with short, dull answers. Tendo feels stuck. He wants to make his parents happy, but it's clearly not going to be easy. Still, he's not about to give up. Later that evening, Tendo notices his dad coughing up blood. It's obviously a bad sign, but his dad hides it, pretending everything's fine. On their way back home, they run into a group of people from the city faces Tendo swears he's seen before. These guys head toward the tunnel filled with zombies, and it's obvious they don't have good intentions. Their leader was your typical loser, maybe even a top-tier one, who actually thrived when the world went to hell since there were no more rules to follow. The first thing this chain smoker did after the collapse, rob a cigarette shop. There, he found a bunch of other misfits, who looked like they'd been in a lifelong feud with their barbers. Together, they formed their own twisted version of Tendo's 100 Things to Do Before Becoming a Zombie, only theirs was the criminal edition. The next morning, Tendo decides to switch things up. The girls gather around, playing with his hair and styling it into something most guys secretly wonder if they could pull off dreadlocks. Later, everyone sits down for a tea break, and Tendo learns that the girl who styled his dreadlocks is actually a pro. She's been working in a hair salon for over a decade. So, when she heard he wanted to try them, she jumped at the chance to help. The other two girls are equally impressive. One used to teach at a college in Tokyo, and the other is a makeup artist for films. Tendo's curious about the movie work, so he asks which project she's been part of. She proudly shows him a poster for a film called Song of the Dead. He's seen it before, but never realized it was shot in Japan. Excited, she explains that they had just started filming the sequel when the zombie outbreak hit the worst place imaginable to get attacked. At first, everyone assumed it was a prank, but the blood from her dying coworkers and the lack of anyone recording quickly proved otherwise. After a chaotic journey, the people of this village welcome them warmly, and even though it's wishful thinking, she hopes she can keep living here. Meanwhile, in another hut, Shizuka is blowing into a tube to keep the fire going when an elderly woman stops by to thank her. She knows this work must be tough since Shizuka isn't used to it, but Shizuka doesn't mind. She wants to learn the old survival skills people used before electricity. The granny doesn't catch all her words, but insists that rice cooked over a traditional hearth fire always tastes best. Shizuka returns to tending the flame, but suddenly she feels an old man's hands on her, sending chills up her spine. The granny quickly drives him away, apologizing and explaining that he's a bit senile and mistook her for his late wife. Though he seems like a frail old man now, he used to be one of the village's top hunters. Just then, a man walks in asking the granny if she has any rope to spare. He cut his hand badly while working with a sickle. She goes to help, but Shizuka warns against tying it too tightly to avoid cutting off circulation. She offers tips that could help stop the bleeding, making people assume she's a doctor. She denies it, saying she only studied medicine as a child because she dreamed of becoming one. But that hasn't stopped the villagers from treating her as their go-to doctor. Out in the fields, Kencho is helping with work when he's shown the cesspit, the place where all the village's waste is stored and turned into fertilizer. Since Japan's heavy rains wash away nutrients from the soil, this method is a lifesaver. Someone jokes that diving into the cesspit will make you successful, but Kencho isn't about to test it. Nearby, he notices a girl sitting alone with her dog and asks about her. He's told she escaped from the city but lost her parents, leaving her dog as her only family. Since arriving, she hasn't smiled once. Kencho decides to change that, keeping his humor clean for her age. He approaches and offers to juggle, but she's puzzled by his sudden approach. He explains that it's polite to greet a lady, whether she's young or old, at least in Italy. She points out he's not Italian, but it makes her giggle. Mission accomplished. Kencho introduces himself and learns her name is Anu. He decides to call her Angie as a nickname. Now that Kencho and Angie are friends, he offers to show her his special performance eating a bowl of udon with his but she politely decides to skip that one. Elsewhere in the village, Beatrix is being shown the water wheel that powers the community. It doesn't generate a ton of electricity, just enough to handle the basics. Lately, zombie bears and boars have been wandering close, so the villagers reinforce the electric fence powered by the wheel. It gives a mild shock to keep the animals out. But there's one thing: Beatrix needs to watch a control box that shuts off the power if there's a leak or the voltage spikes too high. She's warned to be careful, as messing with it could be dangerous. Back with Tendo, the girls chat about how they're starting to like village life. Things take more time here and are harder to do, but that's exactly what makes you connect with the people around you. Later that evening, while Tendo is working in the fields, Kencho comes over to greet him. He's just finished learning how to slaughter a chicken, an experience so traumatic he might never touch chicken tenders again. As they laugh and talk, Kencho spots a familiar face walking by and calls out to Higurashi. It's been ages since he's seen him, but Higurashi clearly isn't happy to run into them and turns to leave. Tendo doesn't recognize him, so Kencho explains they were in the same general studies class in college, though Higurashi mysteriously stopped showing up. Higurashi can't believe fate stuck him with these two again, the guys who always had what he didn't: happiness. Seeing their overly cheerful faces is annoying, but it's perfect for whatever shady plan he's cooking up. That night, Tendo finds his dad outside, having a drink, and asks to join him. His dad agrees, and they sit together under the stars. Tendo admits that even though he once idolized city life, he's starting to think the village isn't so bad, and they could always use extra help here. What he's really trying to say is that he'd like to stay forever. But his dad doesn't want him limiting himself to one small place. A man, he says, should chase the biggest dream he can find with everything he's got. And, just as an afterthought, he tells Tendo that the dreadlocks don't suit him at all. They laugh it off and keep drinking, finally sharing the bonding moment Tendo had been hoping for. Since Higurashi is the one driving the bulldozer and zombies are closing in fast, the group decides to split up to rescue as many people as they can before escaping the village. While Higurashi keeps tearing through everything in sight, Tendo's dad and the women he was talking with earlier barricade themselves inside a house for safety. But it's clear his illness is catching up to him. He collapses, insisting he's fine. Meanwhile, Tendo is fighting his way toward them, swinging a long stick to knock down any zombies in his path. Elsewhere, Angie is frantically searching for her dog, Charo, and finds him, well, getting a little too friendly with a chicken. Relieved to have him back, she's suddenly grabbed from behind by Kencho, who quickly covers her mouth so she doesn't alert a nearby zombie. Once it's gone, he warns her how dangerous it is to wander off alone in a situation like this. Angie explains she had to find Charo now that her parents are gone. He's the only family she has left. Kensho understands but insists it's not safe here. He spots a ladder and helps them climb onto a rooftop, knowing zombies can't make it up that high. Unfortunately, one member of the Reject squad definitely can. He climbs up after them, planning to shove Kensho and Angie off so the horde can tear them apart. Judging by his twisted grin and bitter eyes, life before the apocalypse must have been miserable for him, and now he wants to share that misery by making others suffer just as he did. With a stick in hand, he starts trying to force Kensho over the edge. Meanwhile, Beatrix is racing to shut down the water wheel, so the electric fence will cut off, but her mission gets ruined when Reject number 2 slams a tractor into the horse she's riding. Challenging a German warrior who can slice zombies in half with one swing is already a dumb idea, but this Reject came armed with a chainsaw. In one swipe, she splits Beatrix's weapon in two, showing off skills from her glory days as a 2-time national fencing champ back in middle school, which, sadly, was also the peak of her life. Beatrix draws her sword, ready for a fight to the death. Shizuka, on the other hand, is busy trying to evacuate villagers who have locked themselves inside their homes. She warns that the doors won't hold against zombies for long, but the elders insist she leave without them. They're too old to move quickly, and one man is bedridden. They'd only slow her down. They thank her for all she's done and tell her to save the others. Shizuka can't accept abandoning them, but with no time left, she decides to draw the zombies away herself, promising to come back. Elsewhere, Tendo's dad and the group he's with are struggling to hold off the horde, and just as it looks like they're done for, Tendo arrives swinging. He still has so much he wants to do for his parents. He never earned enough to give them anything big, never took them on trips, and having grandkids for them is still a far-off dream. He refuses to let them die here, but his dad pulls him close and steps outside himself, telling Tendo that if he truly wants to make it up to them, he must live on. His last wish before facing the zombies is for Tendo to protect his mother. We then see the backstory of one Reject, a man who worked non-stop, only to find his home no longer felt like one. His marriage went stale and bitter, and he often chose sleeping in his car over dealing with his wife. Even that peace was ruined by neighbors stopping by to gossip about others doing better than him. Eventually, he realized he was breaking his back for a family he no longer cared for, and now, the only thing that makes him feel alive is watching others die. In the fields, Shizuka hides in the brush to avoid zombies, but something far worse finds her, the Reject with the lifelong grudge against his barber. He looms over her, drooling, and Shizuka feels a terror worse than death. Things get even more disturbing when it's clear what he wants most, to shove his tongue into her mouth. Not willing to become his victim, she bolts at full speed, and honestly, it's shocking how fast he can keep up, which somehow makes him even more pathetic loser than all anime protagonists. One of the Rejects used to work at a French restaurant, but he was too lazy to even try learning French. With no family to kidnap, Duolingo couldn't get to him either. Since he never bothered to improve, he got stuck on cleanup duty. You'd think he'd take that as a hint and finally start learning. Nope. Instead, he decided everyone was just mean for not speaking Japanese in a French restaurant. One day, he went outside for a smoke and tossed his cigarette into a kitchen packed with flammable supplies. You can guess how that ended. Did he take the blame? Of course not. According to him, it was their fault for putting the kitchen where he smoked. Naturally, he got fired, and to this day, he's still bitter they were mad about him burning down the place. But don't be fooled, this man baby is still dangerous, especially with a gun and way too much ammo stuffed into his pockets. Back in the village, the old man who once mistook Shizuka for his late wife suddenly gets a gut feeling she's in serious danger and hauls himself out of bed. Meanwhile, at the water wheel, Beatrix is still locked in combat with the female Reject, managing to hold her off, though the katana she's using is starting to chip under the chainsaw's force. The woman admits Beatrix is a decent swordsman, but warns that a sword can't outlast a chainsaw. The downside for her, the deafening noise is drawing zombies, so she needs to end this fast. When Beatrix asks why she's doing something so cruel, the Reject doesn't think she's wrong at all. She's always been a perfectionist, and her constant nitpicking made her unpopular. But in her mind, she was right 100% of the time, and everyone should have acknowledged it. We cut back to Kensho, still on the edge of the roof as the barber-hating Reject tries to shove him off. After hearing the guy's sob story, Kensho notices something: this man put zero effort into his marriage. He skipped the birth of his own child, didn't even call, and still blamed his wife for being upset. Kensho tells him straight, you can't expect someone to stay interested when you've been avoiding them for years. The Reject wanted an echo chamber, not real feedback, so he pushes harder, trying to silence Kensho. But Kensho spots the cesspit below and flips the script, dragging the Reject off the roof with him. Once on the ground, Kencho realizes zombies are closing in. He's not sure if they're tracking by smell or body heat, but either way, he needs cover. So he takes a literal leap of faith, diving headfirst into the cesspit to mask himself. Now, it's the Reject's turn to face the undead he helped unleash. He doesn't get far before running into the electric fence and becoming Zombie Chow. Later, Kencho climbs out of the cesspit, absolutely coated in filth but still alive, and more importantly, still human, just a very smelly one. Although Angie's grateful, Kencho saved her. She tells him to keep his distance until he's had a proper bath. Back in one of the houses, Old Man Hayo asks where Shizuka went. The other elders explain she's acting as bait to draw zombies away from them. Hayo immediately asks why they're still sitting around, and they admit they're too old to move quickly and wouldn't be able to help even if they try. He scolds them, saying they've survived government shakeups, typhoons, and earthquakes, so a zombie apocalypse shouldn't scare them now. Shizuka, meanwhile, is seconds away from having her throat violated at gunpoint. Before things can go any further, Old Man Hayo fires a shot that knocks the weapon from the Reject's hand. With a furious glare, he and the other elders rush in, giving the man the beating he deserves for targeting their Shizuka. Over by the water wheel, Beatrix realizes there's no winning a debate with someone convinced they're always right. She tells the woman that the right way is subjective, people can have different perspectives. Then, instead of arguing, she lures the zombies toward the wheel, climbing onto it so they'll follow and wreck it in the process. The Reject's mind completely unravels at the idea that Beatrix outsmarted her. Unable to cope, she collapses and is quickly surrounded by zombies, while Beatrix rides away on the broken wheel, unsure how she's going to stop it. Out on the battlefield, Tendo's dad is fighting in his son's place. His moves make it clear where Tendo gets his strength, but his body can't keep up, he collapses from his illness. Just as it seems he's finished, Higurashi appears and drags him to safety, only to immediately threaten to feed him to the zombies, unless Tendo comes out and lets himself be turned. We then see Higurashi's backstory. His life peaked in preschool when he actually had fun. In middle school, he grew distant from his friends, becoming increasingly introverted, and by graduation, he hadn't spoken to a single classmate in years. High school was supposed to be a fresh start, but no matter what he tried, he stayed the same empty, aimless loner. Then one day in college, he saw Tendo enjoying life and took it as a personal insult, leading to this moment, with him holding Tendo's father hostage. Inside the house, Tendo is torn, wanting to save his father but being yelled at not to open the door. His dad warns that if he risks his mother's safety and forces him to watch his own son die, he'll stop considering him his child. Tendo still doesn't want to let him go, but his dad admits he doesn't have much time left anyway. A serious illness is already eating away at him. And with the world in chaos, there's no way to find a doctor. Tendo refuses to give up, saying they might find a doctor somewhere, or a zombie vaccine could be discovered tomorrow. But his father insists that the best way Tendo can repay them is to live to help humanity however he can. Even if they're gone, knowing their son was out there, making the most of his life would make them happiest of all. Tendo starts flashing back to everything that's happened since he arrived. Outside, Higurashi is getting impatient, the door still hasn't opened. And he figures Tendo must have given up on saving his dad, since he's going to die anyway. But then, suddenly, the door swings open, drawing the zombies straight into the house. Screams echo, and moments later, a zombified Tendo stumbles out. Higurashi bursts out, laughing finally. Tendo can't be happy anymore or chase his dreams. But his victory is short-lived. In a sudden twist, Tendo reveals he's not a zombie at all, yanking Higurashi off the bulldozer and slamming him to the ground. Confused, Higurashi demands to know how he's still thinking clearly. The truth, Tendo had come up with a plan earlier with the help of the village's zombie makeup artist. He faked the infection. The bite scene was staged by letting zombies into the house, only for the girls to ambush them from behind before they could actually harm him. From there, it was all about his acting skills, and Higurashi fell for it completely. While Tendo and the others check on his dad, Higurashi breaks down, unable to believe his scheme failed. Tendo asks what his endgame was. Higurashi yells back, he just wanted to do whatever he wanted, to finally have fun. But Tendo points out that even when Higurashi thought he'd won, he didn't look like he was enjoying himself at all. Higurashi insists he was, but then his mind drifts back to the last time he truly had fun as a child. Lost in the memory, he doesn't notice a zombie creeping up until it's too late. The bite sinks in, and panic takes over. The group wants to leave before more zombies arrive, but Tendo stays behind and asks him what was really on his bucket list. Another flashback plays a younger Higurashi hanging out by a pool, laughing with friends. All he ever wanted was to just have fun like that again. Tendo tells him if that's all he wanted, he could have just asked. We see the moment in college when Tendo first stole Higarashi's happiness, only this time, we see that Tendo had actually invited him to join. Instead of accepting, Higurashi ran away. If he'd spoken up, they could have been friends and made it happen. Now, Tendo promises that if he ever does turn into a zombie, he'll come back and hang out with him at a pool. Higurashi cries into his shoulder, regretting everything. But with the infection spreading quickly, he shoves Tendo away and runs off before he loses control and attacks them. Tendo and the others set out to execute their plan, escape the village and shut down the electric fence. But with no clear way over it, they're stuck. Kensho and Angie catch up to them, though Tendo can barely recognize Kensho now that he's basically a walking biohazard. Soon, Shizuka arrives with the rest of the villagers, but with everyone gathered in one place, the zombies are closing in fast, surrounding them with no exit in sight. Then they spot Beatrix still rolling on the broken water wheel, unable to get down. Thinking quickly, she decides to crash straight through the fence. Tendo warns everyone to stand back, and once the path is clear, Beatrix smashes through the barrier, giving them an opening. They all sprint into the forest toward the suspension bridge, their only way out. But when they get there, their hearts sink. The bridge is gone, collapsed into the ravine. With no other route in or out of the village, things look hopeless. Then, by sheer luck, Kumano appears. He had been checking out the commotion and discovered the bridge was down, so he built a new one as fast as he could. Just in time, too, because the zombies are right behind them. Tendo and Kensho grab one end of the bridge, shouting for everyone to cross while they hold it steady. One by one, the villagers make it over safely. Once everyone's across, the two grab onto the ends themselves and leap for safety. It goes quiet, so Beatrix and Shizuka rush over to check if they made it. They're fine, their faces. Not so much as Kensho and Tendo climb up the ladder. Kensho shakes his head at how ridiculous Higurashi's actions were if all he wanted was friends. But Tendo isn't so sure it was that simple. Back when Tendo was stuck in the grind as a corporate drone, he'd lost sight of who he was and what truly mattered. He knows how easily he could have fallen into the same pit of despair as Higurashi. That's why, despite everything Higurashi did, Tendo can't bring himself to hate him. Climbing the last stretch of the ladder, Tendo finds his father waiting at the top, reaching down to pull him up. His dad tells him it's thanks to Tendo that they all made it out, and says he's proud of him. The next day, the villagers put their plan into motion. They lure every zombie out of the village and seal the tunnel shut so no more can get in. They've decided to rebuild and stay here, because this is the only home they've ever known. Kumano even moves in to lead the reconstruction, so it's only a matter of time before the place feels like it used to. Tom thanks Shizuka personally, saying that without her, they all would have given up and let themselves be eaten. Even if she's not technically a doctor, she still saved their lives. Kensho gets similar praise. Angie's eyes are bright again, her spirit restored, all because he took the time to talk to her and cheer her up. That night, Tendo watches over his dad as he sleeps. His mother comes in and admits that, though the old man would never say it, he's been worried about Tendo asking if they'd heard from him. Tendo chuckles, saying anyone would be worried with the world like this. But his mom explains it wasn't the zombie outbreak that made his dad anxious. He'd been worried since the day Tendo left the village 3 years ago. Hearing that, Tendo realizes how much his absence must have hurt his father. With tears in his eyes, he quietly promises that if anything ever happens to him, he'll make sure his mom and the village are taken care for him. Tendo finally asks his mom what illness his dad actually has, and the answer catches him completely off guard. It's not cancer or some deadly disease, it's hemorrhoids. Still, that's nothing to laugh at, but every time his mom tried to convince his dad to get surgery, he was too stubborn to see a doctor. Realizing his dad isn't on the verge of death like he thought, Tendo decides it's time to move on. Taking his father's advice to heart, he wants to chase the biggest dream he can, finding a cure for the zombie virus and saving the world. And then, as a personal bonus, making sure his dad finally gets that hemorrhoid surgery. When his dad wakes up and hears Tendo's plan, he's all for it. Tendo officially adds it to his bucket list and asks the others if they have anything they'd like to add as well. They spend the night sharing dreams and goals they hope to achieve someday. The next morning, everyone gets ready to leave, saying heartfelt goodbyes to the villagers. And even during the apocalypse, a mother's instinct doesn't change. Tendo's mom sends him off with enough food to last for days. With the villagers waving them off, the group sets out to find a cure for the zombie virus, and to enjoy the journey while they're at it. That's it for today's video, guys. Should Tendo clap anyone or die you a 20-year V-card holder? Watch the following, and I will see you in the next one.